The gunshot echoed through the mountains just as Hannah Dalton threw herself through her bedroom window, glass shattering around her like frozen tears in the December night of 1883. Her father's enraged roar followed her into the darkness, and she ran, barefoot through the snow, knowing that if she stopped, if she hesitated even for a moment, he would drag her back, and this time she would not survive his fury. The thin cotton of her nightgown offered no protection against the bitter cold that descended on Pinon, New Mexico, that winter, but fear drove her forward, her breath coming in ragged gasps that formed white clouds in the moonlight. She had lived 22 years under Clayton Dalton's brutal hand, watching her mother fade away until there was nothing left but a ghost who finally gave up breathing 3 months ago. Hannah had thought foolishly that her mother's death might soften her father, might make him realize what his drinking and his rage had cost them all. Instead, it had unleashed something darker in him, something that looked at her with eyes that made her skin crawl and her stomach turn. Tonight, when he had come to her room with whiskey on his breath and told her she would be taking her mother's place in all ways, she had known she had to run or die trying. The snow fell heavier now, covering her tracks as quickly as she made them, which might have been a blessing if it did not also mean she was leaving no trail for anyone who might want to help her. But who would help? Everyone in Pinon knew Clayton Dalton owned half the businesses in town and had the sheriff in his pocket. Her father had spent years building a reputation as a respectable widower, a pillar of the community who supported the church and donated to the poor. No one would believe his daughter if she told them the truth about the monster who lived behind his public face. She stumbled down the mountainside, her feet numb and bleeding, heading toward the old mining road that led to the neighboring town of Las Cruces. If she could just make it there, if she could find work, find somewhere to hide, maybe she could build a new life. Maybe she could finally be free. The wind howled through the pines, and she pulled her arms tight around herself, trying to preserve what little warmth remained in her body. Her dark hair, which she had inherited from her mother along with her green eyes and stubborn chin, whipped around her face, and she pushed it back with shaking hands. Behind her, she heard the sound of horses. Her father had wasted no time gathering his men, the ones who did his dirty work and asked no questions as long as the money was good. Hannah forced her legs to move faster, though every step sent shooting pain through her frozen feet. She left the road, plunging into the forest where the horses would have trouble following, branches tearing at her nightgown and scratching her arms and face. Blood ran warm against her icy skin, but she could not stop, could not slow down. The forest opened suddenly into a small clearing, and Hannah skidded to a halt, her heart sinking. The clearing was bisected by a frozen creek, and on the far side, illuminated by moonlight reflecting off the snow, stood a lone figure on horseback. The horse was a magnificent buckskin, and the man sat easy in the saddle despite the cold, his dark hat pulled low and a rifle resting across his lap. For a moment, Hannah thought about turning back, trying another direction, but the sounds of her father's search party were getting closer, and she had run out of options. She started across the frozen creek, her feet sliding on the ice, and the man on horseback moved forward to intercept her path. As she got closer, she could make out more details in the moonlight. He was young, maybe 26 or 27, with a strong jaw shadowed by several days of stubble and eyes that seemed to pierce right through her. He wore a heavy coat and leather gloves, and everything about him spoke of someone who knew how to survive in this harsh country. Hannah tried to move around him, but he guided his horse to block her again, and when she looked up at him with desperation in her eyes, he spoke for the first time, his voice low and firm with an authority that made her stop in her tracks. Not another step. His eyes swept over her, taking in her torn nightgown, her bleeding feet, the bruises on her arms that she knew were visible even in the dim light. His jaw tightened, and something dangerous flashed across his face before his expression became carefully neutral again. "Who did this to you?" "Please," Hannah gasped out, her teeth chattering so hard she could barely form words. "Please, I have to keep going. He is coming. He will kill me. Please just let me pass." The man looked past her toward the sound of approaching horses, then back at her face. She saw him make a decision, saw something shift in those dark eyes, and then he was swinging down from his saddle in one fluid motion. He shrugged out of his heavy coat and wrapped it around her shoulders before she could protest, and the warmth of it, the warmth of his body heat still trapped in the fabric, made her want to weep. "Can you ride?" he asked, and when she nodded, he lifted her onto his horse with a strength that seemed effortless. He swung up behind her, his arms coming around her to grip the reins, and she found herself pressed against his chest, surrounded by his warmth and the smell of leather and wood smoke and something else, something purely masculine that made her feel safe for the first time in longer than she could remember. "My name is Zachary Norris," he said quietly, his breath warm against her ear. "And I promise you, whoever is chasing you will have to go through me to get to you." Before Hannah could respond, her father's voice rang out across the clearing, thick with rage and alcohol. "Hannah! Hannah, you get back here right now. I am your father and you will obey me." Zachary's arms tightened around her and she felt him shift in the saddle. "That the man who hurt you?" When she nodded, unable to speak, she felt rather than heard the rumble of anger in his chest. "How old are you?" 22, she whispered. "Then you are a grown woman and can make your own choices." He raised his voice, calling out across the clearing. "The lady is with me now. I suggest you turn around and go home." Clayton Dalton emerged from the tree line on a big gray horse, flanked by 3 of his men. Even in the moonlight, Hannah could see the fury on his face, the way his hands clenched on his reins. "That is my daughter, and she is coming home with me. This is none of your concern, stranger." "I am making it my concern." Zachary's voice was calm, but there was steel underneath it. "She is a grown woman and she does not want to go with you. That makes it real simple." "You know who I am?" Clayton's voice rose, spittle flying from his lips. "I own this town. I can have you run out of the territory by morning. I do not live in your town, and I do not care who you think you are." Zachary shifted his rifle slightly, a subtle movement that nevertheless made it clear he knew how to use it. "Last chance. Ride away." Hannah's father started to advance, and 2 of his men moved with him, but the third, a younger man Hannah recognized as Tom Wheeler, held back. "Mr. Dalton," Tom said hesitantly, "maybe we should just let this go. It is freezing out here, and shut your mouth," Clayton snarled. "That is my property, and I will have her back. Property." The word hung in the air like poison, and Hannah felt Zachary go very still behind her. When he spoke again, his voice was soft, which somehow made it more terrifying than if he had shouted. "She is not property. She is a human being. And if you take one more step toward us, I will put a bullet between your eyes and sleep just fine tonight." The 2 groups faced each other across the frozen creek, and for a moment, Hannah thought her father would be stupid enough, drunk enough, to actually try to take her by force. But something in Zachary's eyes must have convinced him otherwise, because he finally jerked his horse's head around with enough violence to make the animal toss its head in protest. "This is not over," he spat. "She is my daughter, and the law is on my side. I will have the sheriff after you for kidnapping." "She can tell the sheriff herself that she came with me willingly," Zachary replied. "Now get out of my sight before I change my mind about letting you leave." Clayton Dalton stared at his daughter for a long moment, and Hannah forced herself to meet his eyes, forced herself not to cower the way she had done for so many years. "You are dead to me," he finally said, his voice cold and flat. "You hear me, girl? Dead. Do not ever think about coming back." He wheeled his horse and rode back into the forest, his men following. Tom Wheeler looked back once, something like sympathy on his young face, before he too disappeared into the trees. The sound of their horses faded, and suddenly Hannah was shaking so hard that her teeth rattled together, great shudders that racked her whole body. "Easy," Zachary murmured, and one of his arms left the reins to wrap around her waist, holding her steady. "You are safe now. I have got you." He urged his horse forward, away from the clearing, and Hannah let herself lean back against his solid warmth, too exhausted and too cold to worry about propriety or what it meant to be pressed against a strange man in the middle of the night. They rode for what felt like hours, though it was probably only 30 minutes or so, before Zachary guided his horse toward a small cabin nestled in a grove of trees. Smoke rose from the chimney, and warm light glowed in the windows, and Hannah felt her eyes fill with tears at the sight of it, at the promise of warmth and safety it represented. Zachary dismounted and reached up to lift her down, and her legs buckled when her feet touched the ground. He caught her easily, swinging her up into his arms, and carried her toward the cabin door. It opened before they reached it, and a woman in her 50s appeared, her gray-streaked hair pulled back in a neat bun and concern written across her weathered face. "Dear Lord in heaven," she breathed, taking in Hannah's appearance. "Zachary, what happened?" She was running from her father, Aunt Martha. "She needs warmth and medical attention." He carried Hannah inside, and the heat from the fireplace washed over her like a blessing, though it made her frozen skin sting and burn. Martha Norris, as Zachary introduced her, immediately took charge. She shooed Zachary out of the room and helped Hannah out of her torn nightgown, clucking over the bruises and cuts that covered her body. She wrapped her in warm blankets and sat her by the fire, then went to work cleaning and bandaging her feet, her touch gentle despite the pain it caused. "That father of yours should be horsewhipped," Martha muttered as she worked. "A man who would do this to his own daughter is no man at all." Hannah found her voice, rough from the cold and from screaming. "He will come looking for me. He has the sheriff in his pocket. I am putting you and your nephew in danger by being here." Martha looked up at her with fierce eyes. "Let him come. Zachary can handle himself, and I am not afraid of bullies, no matter how much money they have." She finished with Hannah's feet and stood, moving to a chest against the wall. She pulled out a worn but clean dress in a soft blue color. "This was my daughter's. She married and moved to California 5 years ago, but she left some of her things here. You are about the same size, I think." "I cannot thank you enough," Hannah said, her voice breaking. "I had nowhere else to go. You are safe here, child. That is all that matters right now." Martha helped her into the dress, which fit reasonably well though it was a little loose in the waist, and then brought her a bowl of thick stew that had been simmering on the stove. Hannah ate ravenously, not realizing until the food was in front of her how long it had been since she had eaten a proper meal. Her father had taken to locking her in her room, bringing her only bread and water, trying to break her spirit. Zachary came back inside once Hannah was dressed and fed, carrying an armload of firewood. He added several logs to the fire, then stood with his back to it, studying Hannah with an intensity that made her both nervous and strangely warm. "Tell me about your father," he said quietly. "Tell me what he has done to you." Hannah looked down at her bandaged hands, shame washing over her even though she knew, logically, that she had nothing to be ashamed of. "He was not always like this. When I was young, he was stern but not cruel. But he drank more and more over the years, and the drinking brought out something dark in him. He would hit my mother for the smallest things, for burning his dinner or speaking out of turn. I tried to protect her, but I was just a child and then a young woman, and he was so much stronger. She took a shuddering breath, and Martha came to sit beside her, taking her hand. When my mother died, I thought maybe the worst was over, but instead he started looking at me differently, started saying things that made my skin crawl. Tonight he came to my room and said that since my mother was gone, I would have to take her place. In all ways. I knew what he meant. I knew that if I did not run, he would. She could not finish the sentence, could not say the words out loud. Zachary's hands clenched into fists and the muscle in his jaw jumped. He will never touch you again. I give you my word on that. But the sheriff, Hannah started, is one man and not a particularly brave one from what I have heard. Zachary moved to sit in a chair across from them, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. I am a rancher, Miss Dalton. I own a spread about 20 miles from here, up in the high country. I came down to Pinyon to see my aunt and to pick up supplies before the worst of the winter storms hit. I was riding back tonight when I heard someone crashing through the woods like the devil himself was on their heels. You saved my life, Hannah said simply. I was freezing to death out there. You saved your own life by having the courage to run. His dark eyes held hers, and Hannah felt something shift inside her chest, something she could not quite name. What will you do now? Do you have family elsewhere, somewhere you can go? Hannah shook her head. My mother's family disowned her when she married my father. They said he was beneath them, that she was throwing her life away. They were right, but they never tried to help her. I have no one. Martha and Zachary exchanged a glance, and then Martha smiled. Well, you have us now, dear. You can stay here as long as you need to. I could use the company and the help around the house. My arthritis has been acting up something terrible this winter. I could not impose, Hannah began, but Martha waved her objection away. Nonsense. It is settled. You will stay here at least through the winter. In the spring, if you want to move on, we can help you find a position somewhere. But for now, you need rest and safety. Tears spilled down Hannah's cheeks, tears of relief and gratitude and the overwhelming emotion of being shown kindness after so long without it. Thank you. Thank you both so much. Zachary stood, settling his hat back on his head. I should get back to my ranch. I have men there who can handle things for a while, but I need to make sure everything is secure for the winter. He looked at Hannah again, and she saw concern and something else in his eyes, something that made her pulse quicken. I will come back in a few days to check on you, to make sure your father has not caused any trouble. Be careful, Hannah said, surprising herself with the urgency in her voice. He has a lot of influence in this town. So do I in my own way. He smiled for the first time, and it transformed his face, making him look younger and somehow more dangerous all at once. Sleep well, Miss Dalton. You are safe now. After he left, Martha showed Hannah to a small bedroom at the back of the house. It was simple but clean, with a comfortable bed and a window that looked out over the snowy landscape. Hannah crawled under the heavy quilts, and despite everything that had happened, despite the fear and the pain and the uncertainty of what would come next, she fell asleep almost immediately, feeling safe for the first time in her entire adult life. She woke the next morning to the smell of coffee and frying bacon, and for a moment she panicked, thinking she had overslept and her father would be furious. Then memory returned and she sagged back against the pillows in relief. She was free. She had escaped. Martha fed her a huge breakfast, insisting that she needed to regain her strength, and then put her to work on simple tasks around the house. It felt good to be useful, to have her hands occupied, and it kept her mind from dwelling too much on what might happen next. Would her father really come after her? Would the sheriff try to force her to return home? The days passed quietly. Hannah helped Martha with cooking and cleaning and mending, learning that the older woman had lived alone since her husband died of pneumonia 4 years ago. Zachary had been her brother's son, and when both of Zachary's parents were killed by Comanche raiders when he was 16, Martha had taken him in and helped him establish his ranch. "He is a good man," Martha said one afternoon as they sat by the fire doing needlework. "Strong and capable, but kind too. He has never forgotten what it was like to lose everything, to need help. That is why he stopped for you that night. He could have just ridden on, but that is not who he is." Hannah thought about Zachary often in those first days, remembering the solid warmth of his body behind her on the horse, the quiet authority in his voice when he faced down her father. She found herself watching the road, waiting for him to return as he had promised. He came back on the 4th day, riding up to the cabin in the late afternoon with snowflakes dusting his hat and shoulders. Hannah was outside drawing water from the well, and she saw him coming from a distance, her heart doing a strange skip in her chest at the sight of him. He dismounted and walked toward her, moving with the easy grace of someone who spent most of his life on horseback. "Miss Dalton," he greeted her, touching the brim of his hat. "You look better, more rested." "I am, thanks to you and your aunt." She suddenly felt shy, aware that her borrowed dress was plain and that her hair was simply braided down her back, nothing fancy or sophisticated. "Have you heard any news from town?" His expression darkened. "Your father has been making noise, claiming you were kidnapped and demanding that the sheriff do something about it. But Tom Wheeler, one of the men who was with him that night, came forward and told the truth about what he saw. Said you were clearly running for your life and that you went with me willingly when I offered help." "Tom did that." Hannah was shocked. Tom was young, maybe 21 or 22, and she had always thought him too weak to stand up to her father. "He did. Cost him his job, from what I hear, but he said he could not stand by and let an innocent woman be dragged back to hell." Zachary smiled slightly. "There are still good people in the world, Miss Dalton. Sometimes they just need a little courage to step forward. And the sheriff, what did he say?" "Not much he can say now. You are an adult woman who left of your own free will. There is no crime in that. He came sniffing around my ranch yesterday, trying to intimidate me, but I made it clear that you are under my protection, and that any attempt to bother you would be met with force." The casual way he said it, the absolute certainty in his voice, made Hannah feel warm despite the cold air. "You barely know me. Why would you risk so much for a stranger?" Zachary looked at her for a long moment, and Hannah saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. "You are not a stranger, not anymore." He cleared his throat, looking almost uncertain for the first time since she had met him. "I was wondering if you might like to see my ranch. It is a beautiful ride, even in winter, and I thought you might be getting restless, stuck in the cabin all day." Hannah glanced toward the house, where Martha was surely watching from the window, and then back at Zachary. "I would like that very much." He helped her onto his horse, and they rode out together, with Hannah seated in front of him the way she had been that first night. But this time there was no fear, no desperate flight through the darkness. This time she could appreciate the strength of his arms around her, the way his body sheltered her from the worst of the wind, the low rumble of his voice when he pointed out landmarks along the trail. His ranch was larger than she had expected, with a main house built of sturdy logs and several outbuildings that housed his men and his livestock. He had about 1,500 acres, he told her, and ran cattle and horses. It was hard work, especially in winter, but it was honest work and he was good at it. "I built most of this myself," he said with quiet pride as they stood on the porch of the main house, looking out over the snowy pastures. "After my parents died, I worked for other ranchers for years, saving every penny. My aunt helped me buy the land when I was 20, and I have been building it up ever since." "It is wonderful," Hannah said honestly. "You should be proud of what you have accomplished." He looked down at her, and the intensity of his gaze made her knees feel weak. "I've been alone here for a long time. It is a good life, but it can be lonely. When I saw you that night, running through the snow, something in me recognized something in you. Someone who had been hurt but was not broken. Someone who was fighting for something better." "I do not know if I am as strong as you seem to think," Hannah said quietly. "I spent so many years being afraid, accepting my father's abuse because I did not think I had any other choice. But when it mattered most, you ran. You chose life. That takes more strength than you know." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to, and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Hannah, I know it has only been a few days, and I do not want to presume anything. But I need you to know that you have affected me in a way no woman ever has. I cannot stop thinking about you." Hannah's heart pounded so hard she was sure he must be able to hear it. "I think about you too," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "All the time. You saved my life, but it is more than that. When I am with you, I feel safe in a way I never have before. I feel like maybe I could have a future, a real future, instead of just surviving day by day." Zachary smiled, and it was like the sun breaking through storm clouds. "I want to court you properly if you will let me. I know the circumstances are unusual, but I do not care about that. I care about you." "Yes," Hannah said, feeling a rush of joy so intense it almost frightened her. "Yes, I would like that very much." He took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin, and lifted it to his lips. The kiss he pressed to her knuckles was soft and reverent, and Hannah felt heat rush through her entire body. They stood there on the porch as snow began to fall more heavily, and Hannah thought that despite everything she had been through, despite all the pain and fear, maybe it had all been worth it to bring her to this moment, to this man. The winter deepened, and with it, Hannah and Zachary's relationship grew. He came to visit her at Martha's cabin 3 or 4 times a week, always bringing small gifts, a warm shawl, a book of poetry, a pretty hair ribbon. They would sit by the fire and talk for hours, and Hannah learned that beneath his quiet exterior, Zachary was thoughtful and well-read, with a dry sense of humor that surprised her into laughter. He told her about his childhood, about how his mother had been a schoolteacher who made sure he could read and write and do figures, even while they were living on the frontier. He told her about the day the Comanche attacked, how he had been out hunting and had come home to find his parents dead and the house burning. The pain in his voice when he spoke of it made Hannah reach out and take his hand, and he held onto her like she was an anchor in a storm. She told him more about her own past, about the mother who had tried to protect her but had been too beaten down herself to do much good. She told him about the small moments of joy she had managed to find, the garden she had tended in secret, the books she had borrowed from the church library and hidden under her mattress. And she told him about her dreams, the ones she had never dared speak aloud before, about having a home of her own where she felt safe, about maybe having children someday who would grow up knowing only love and kindness. "You will have that," Zachary said with absolute certainty. "I will give that to you, if you will let me." As the weeks turned into months, their relationship deepened into something neither of them could deny. Zachary kissed her for the first time on Christmas Eve, standing under the porch of Martha's cabin with snow falling gently around them. It was a soft kiss, tentative and sweet, and when he pulled back, Hannah saw love shining in his eyes. "I am falling for you," he said quietly. "No, that is not right. I have already fallen. I love you, Hannah Dalton. I know it is fast, and I know you might need more time, but I needed you to know." Hannah felt tears prick her eyes, but they were happy tears this time. "I love you too, Zachary Norris. I think I started loving you the moment you wrapped your coat around me and promised to keep me safe." He kissed her again, deeper this time, and Hannah felt like her heart might burst with happiness. This was what it was supposed to feel like, she realized. This tenderness, this respect, this overwhelming desire to be close to someone not out of fear but out of love. This was what she had been missing her entire life. In January, news came that Clayton Dalton had left Pinyon, selling his businesses and moving back east. Martha heard it from a friend in town and reported it to Hannah with satisfaction. "Good riddance to bad rubbish," she said firmly. "Maybe now you can stop looking over your shoulder all the time." Hannah felt a weight lift from her chest that she had not even realized she was carrying. Her father was gone. He could not hurt her anymore. She was truly free. In February, on a clear cold day with the sun shining bright on the snow, Zachary asked her to marry him. They were at his ranch, standing in the main house that he had built with his own hands, and he dropped to one knee in front of the fireplace. "Hannah Dalton, you are the strongest, bravest, most beautiful woman I have ever known. You make me want to be a better man. You make me laugh and you make me think and you make me feel things I never thought I would feel. Will you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Will you help me turn this house into a home and build a life with me?" "Yes," Hannah said, pulling him to his feet and throwing her arms around his neck. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." They were married in March, in a small ceremony at the church in Pinyon with Martha and a handful of Zachary's ranch hands in attendance. Tom Wheeler was there too, having taken a job at Zachary's ranch after losing his position with Clayton Dalton, and he wished them well with genuine warmth. Hannah wore a dress that Martha had made for her, a beautiful creation in cream-colored silk with lace at the collar and cuffs, and she felt like a princess. When Zachary kissed her at the end of the ceremony, sealing their vows, Hannah thought about how far she had come from that desperate woman fleeing through the snow. She had been so certain that night that she was going to die, that there was no escape from the prison her life had become. But she had run anyway, had fought for her freedom even when it seemed hopeless, and that choice had led her here to this moment, to this man who loved her with a fierceness that still took her breath away. Their wedding night was everything she had hoped it would be. Zachary was gentle and patient, taking his time to make sure she felt safe and cherished. He kissed every inch of her skin, whispering words of love and desire that made her feel beautiful and wanted. When they finally came together, it was not the violent taking she had feared after growing up watching her father hurt her mother. Instead, it was a joining, a union of two people who had chosen each other and would keep choosing each other every day for the rest of their lives. Life at the ranch was hard work, but Hannah thrived on it. She learned to cook for the ranch hands, to help with the horses, to manage the household accounts. Zachary taught her to ride properly, and she discovered a love of galloping across the open range with the wind in her hair and the sun on her face. She made friends with the wives of neighboring ranchers, women who welcomed her warmly and helped her learn the ways of ranch life. In the evenings, she and Zachary would sit together on their porch, watching the sun set over the mountains, and talk about their days and their dreams. He told her often how much he loved her, how grateful he was that she had come into his life, and she told him the same. The passion between them never dimmed. If anything, it grew stronger as they grew more comfortable with each other, learning what gave the other pleasure and finding joy in that discovery. By summer, Hannah realized she was pregnant. The morning sickness started first, and then the changes to her body that made it unmistakable. When she told Zachary, he lifted her up and spun her around, his face alight with joy. "We are having a baby," he said wonderingly. "Hannah, we are going to be parents. Are you happy?" she asked, even though she could see the answer written all over his face. "Happy does not even begin to cover it. You have given me everything, Hannah. A home, a family, a reason to wake up grateful every single morning. I love you more than I can ever put into words." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and Hannah bloomed with health and happiness. Martha came to stay with them a month before the baby was due, wanting to be there to help with the birth and the first difficult weeks. When Hannah's labor started on a warm October night, Zachary stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand and encouraging her through the pain. Their son was born just after sunrise, coming into the world with a loud cry that announced his presence. He had dark hair like his father and green eyes like his mother, and when Zachary held him for the first time, Hannah saw tears streaming down her husband's face. "He is perfect," Zachary whispered. "You are perfect. Thank you, Hannah. Thank you for giving me this gift." They named him Jacob, after Zachary's father, and he was a happy, healthy baby who quickly became the center of their world. Watching Zachary with their son, seeing the gentleness and patience he showed, made Hannah fall even more deeply in love with him. This was the father she had always wished she could have had, the kind of man who would protect and nurture and love his child unconditionally. 2 years later, they had a daughter, Sarah, who had her father's dark eyes and a stubborn streak a mile wide. And 2 years after that, another son, Matthew, who was quiet and thoughtful and loved horses more than anything else in the world. Their house was full of noise and laughter, and the beautiful chaos of family life, and Hannah thought sometimes that her heart might burst from the sheer joy of it all. One evening, when the children were in bed and she and Zachary were sitting on their porch watching the stars come out, she leaned her head against his shoulder and sighed contentedly. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, his arm coming around her to pull her close. "About that night 7 years ago when you found me in the snow, about how terrified I was, how certain I was that my life was over." She looked up at him, seeing the moonlight reflected in his eyes. "I never could have imagined this. This happiness, this peace, this incredible life we have built together. You saved me, Zachary. In every way a person can be saved." He kissed the top of her head, his voice rough with emotion when he spoke. "We saved each other, Hannah. You gave me a reason to care about something beyond just surviving. You taught me what it means to truly love someone, to build a life with purpose and meaning. Before you, I was just going through the motions. Now, every day is a gift." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, and then Zachary spoke again. "I have been thinking about expanding the ranch, maybe buying the property to the east. Tom has been doing excellent work as foreman, and we are turning a good profit. We could provide for a lot more people, give them good jobs and fair wages." Hannah smiled, loving how his mind always worked toward helping others, toward building something lasting and good. "I think that is a wonderful idea. And I have been thinking about starting a school here on the ranch, for our children and for the children of the ranch hands. Martha could help me teach, and we could make sure every child gets an education." "You would be an amazing teacher," Zachary said warmly. "Your mother would be so proud of you, Hannah, of the woman you have become, of the life you have built, of the mother you are to our children." Tears pricked Hannah's eyes at the mention of her mother. "I hope so. I hope she can see wherever she is that we broke the cycle. That our children are growing up safe and loved and happy. They are, and they always will be. I give you my word on that." He turned her face up to his and kissed her softly. "I love you, Hannah Norris, today, tomorrow, and for all the days of my life." "I love you too," she whispered against his lips. "Always and forever." As they sat there under the stars, Hannah thought about the long journey that had brought her to this moment. The fear and pain of her childhood, the desperate flight through the snow, the moment when a stranger on horseback had blocked her path and changed her life forever. She thought about all the love and laughter and hard work that had come after, about the family they had created and the life they had built together. She was no longer the terrified girl who had thrown herself through a window to escape her father's rage. She was a woman now, a wife and mother, strong and capable and deeply loved. She had a home where she felt safe, children who would never know the fear she had grown up with, and a husband who cherished her more than anything in the world. The ranch continued to prosper over the years, becoming one of the most successful in New Mexico. Zachary's fair treatment of his workers and his reputation for honesty made him a respected figure in the territory, and men came from all over looking for work on his land. Hannah's school flourished too, with more than 20 children attending classes in the schoolhouse Zachary had built near the main house. She loved teaching, loved seeing the children's faces light up when they mastered a new skill or discovered the joy of reading. Tom Wheeler eventually married a sweet woman named Emily, who worked at the general store in Pinon, and they settled on a piece of land adjacent to Zachary's ranch. Tom had become one of Zachary's closest friends, and their families were intertwined, with children playing together and dinners shared at least once a week. Tom told Hannah once that standing up to Clayton Dalton that night, telling the truth about what he had seen, had been the hardest thing he had ever done. But it had also been the moment when he stopped being a boy and became a man, and he would never regret it. As for Clayton Dalton, they heard years later that he had died alone in a boarding house in Boston, his money gone and his reputation ruined. Hannah felt a moment of sadness when she heard the news, not for the man he had been but for the father he might have been if he had made different choices. But then she looked at Zachary playing with their children in the yard, tossing Jacob in the air while Sarah and Matthew laughed and begged for their turns, and the sadness passed. She had spent enough of her life being hurt by her father. She would not waste another moment thinking about him. The years passed in a blur of seasons, each one bringing new joys and new challenges. They added 2 more children to their family, twin girls named Rose and Lily, who were born when Hannah was 32, and who kept everyone on their toes with their mischievous natures. The older children doted on their little sisters, and Hannah loved watching her sons help Zachary teach them to ride, while Sarah read them stories at bedtime. Martha lived to see all 5 of her great nieces and nephews born, and she passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 78, surrounded by the family she loved. They buried her on a hill overlooking the ranch, and Hannah visited her grave often, bringing flowers and telling her about the children's latest adventures. She owed Martha so much, and she made sure her children knew about the kind, brave woman who had taken in a stranger and given her a home. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Zachary took Hannah back to the spot where he had first found her, that clearing by the frozen creek. It was summer now, and the creek burbled cheerfully over smooth stones, wildflowers blooming in brilliant colors all around them. "Do you remember what I said to you that night?" he asked, taking both her hands in his. "Not another step," Hannah replied, smiling at the memory. "I thought you were going to send me back to him. I was so afraid. And I thought you were the most courageous person I had ever seen." "Still do, actually." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Inside was a necklace, a delicate gold chain with a pendant shaped like a star. "This is for you. A star to remind you that even in the darkest night there is light, there is hope, there is a chance for something better." Hannah's eyes filled with tears as he fastened the necklace around her neck. "It is beautiful. You are beautiful, Zachary Norris, not just on the outside, though you are certainly that, but inside, where it really matters. You have the most beautiful soul of anyone I have ever known." "I learned from the best," he said, pulling her into his arms. "You taught me what it means to be truly strong, Hannah. To survive what you survived and come out the other side still capable of love, still capable of joy, still capable of building something good. That takes a kind of strength most people never have to find." They made love there in the meadow, under the summer sky, reaffirming the vows they had made 20 years ago. And when they rode back to the ranch hand in hand, they found their children waiting on the porch, a special dinner prepared and handmade gifts spread out on the table. Jacob, now 19 and looking more like his father every day, had carved a beautiful jewelry box for his mother. Sarah, 17 and as stubborn and brilliant as ever, had written her a poem. Matthew, 15 and gentle-hearted, had picked and pressed flowers from all over the ranch to make her a picture. And the twins, now 8 years old, had drawn pictures of the whole family together, stick figures holding hands under a bright sun. Hannah looked around at her family, at the home they had created, at the life that had seemed impossible that terrible night 20 years ago, and she felt gratitude wash over her in waves. She had been given a second chance, and she had used it to build something beautiful. She had taken the love Zachary had offered her and multiplied it, creating a family full of laughter and joy and unconditional acceptance. That night, after the children were in bed and she and Zachary were alone in their room, she stood at the window looking out over the ranch. Zachary came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking?" he asked, a question he had asked her countless times over the years. "That I am the luckiest woman alive," she said simply. "That I get to spend every day with the man I love, raising children who are healthy and happy, doing work that matters. How did I get so lucky?" It was not luck, Hannah. It was courage. It was choosing to run instead of giving up. It was trusting a stranger on a dark night. It was working hard to build this life we have. You earned every bit of this happiness. She turned in his arms to face him, reaching up to cup his face in her hands. His hair was starting to gray at the temples now, and there were lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun. But to her, he was as handsome as the day she had met him. More handsome, actually, because now she knew not just his face but his heart, his soul, everything that made him the man he was. "I love you," she said, the words as true and necessary as breathing. "I will love you until the day I die, and if there is anything beyond that, I will love you there too." "And I love you," he replied, kissing her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "You are my heart, Hannah. You and our children. You are everything that matters." They stood there together as the moon rose over the mountains, two people who had found each other in the darkness and had built a life full of light. Hannah thought about the girl she had been, running through the snow with no hope and no future, and the woman she had become, surrounded by love and purpose and joy. The journey had been hard, but it had been worth every difficult step. Their story was not a fairy tale. There had been no magic wands or fairy godmothers, no instant transformations. Instead, there had been hard work and determination, and the daily choice to love and trust and build something good. There had been difficult days and sleepless nights and moments of doubt. But there had also been laughter and passion, and the deep satisfaction of creating a life of meaning and purpose. As the years continued to pass, Hannah and Zachary watched their children grow into remarkable adults. Jacob took over much of the ranch management, showing the same fairness and business sense his father had. Sarah became a teacher in Pinyon, carrying on her mother's passion for education. Matthew started breeding horses, developing a reputation for producing some of the finest animals in the territory. And the twins, Rose and Lily, were still deciding their paths, but whatever they chose, Hannah knew they would do it with the confidence and security that came from growing up loved. By the time Hannah turned 50, she was a grandmother 3 times over, with more grandchildren surely on the way. She loved watching Zachary with their grandchildren, seeing the same tenderness he had shown their own children reflected in every interaction. He would sit for hours telling them stories, teaching them to rope, letting them help with ranch work even when it meant everything took twice as long. One evening, sitting on their porch as the sun set in a blaze of orange and pink, Hannah looked at her husband and felt the same flutter in her chest she had felt when he first kissed her all those years ago. "Thank you," she said quietly. Zachary looked over at her, his eyebrows raised. "For what?" "For stopping me that night. For not letting me take another step into the darkness. For giving me a reason to hope, a reason to live, a reason to believe in happiness. For loving me every single day since then. For being the man you are." He reached over and took her hand, their fingers intertwining as naturally as breathing. "I should be thanking you for the same things. We saved each other, remember? We built this life together, one day at a time, one choice at a time. Best choice I ever made," Hannah said, squeezing his hand. "Trusting you that night, believing you when you said you would keep me safe, taking a chance on love even though I had never seen what real love looked like before." "Second best choice I ever made," Zachary replied with a smile. "Oh, what was the first?" "Deciding to ride down to see Aunt Martha that week instead of waiting until spring. If I had waited, I would not have been there to find you. I would have missed out on the best thing that ever happened to me." They sat together as darkness fell, holding hands and watching the stars appear one by one in the vast New Mexico sky. Inside the house, they could hear the sounds of family, of grandchildren playing and children laughing and life continuing in all its messy, beautiful glory. Hannah thought about the journey that had brought her here, from that terrible night fleeing through the snow to this moment of perfect peace and contentment. She thought about how one decision, one moment of courage, one desperate choice to run toward freedom instead of accepting captivity, had changed everything. She thought about the stranger who had become her husband, her partner, her great love, and how he had given her not just safety but also purpose and joy, and a family that was everything she had ever dreamed of. The scar on her foot from that night still ached sometimes when the weather changed, a permanent reminder of where she had come from and what she had survived. But she did not mind it. It was part of her story, part of the journey that had led her to this life. And she would not change a single thing about that journey, not even the painful parts, because it had all been necessary to bring her here, to this porch, to this man, to this beautiful life they had created together. "I love you, Zachary Norris," she said as she did almost every night. "And I love you, Hannah Norris," he replied as he did almost every night. And in those simple words, repeated over decades, lay the foundation of everything good and true and lasting in their lives. They had found each other in the darkness, and together they had created light. They had found each other broken, and together they had healed. They had found each other alone, and together they had built a family that would last for generations. As Hannah finally stood and headed inside, Zachary's hand still holding hers, she looked back one more time at the land that had become her home. The ranch stretched out under the stars, peaceful and prosperous, a testament to what could be built when love and hard work combined. This was her legacy, hers and Zachary's. Not just the land or the buildings or the business, but the love they had created and shared, the family they had raised, the example they had set of what it meant to choose kindness and courage and hope even in the darkest times. She had started her story as a victim, running through the snow with no future and no hope. But she had refused to end her story that way. She had fought and survived and built something better. And now, looking at everything she and Zachary had created together, she knew that the girl who had thrown herself through that window so many years ago would be proud of the woman she had become. The ending of her story was not written yet, would not be written for many years to come. But she knew, with absolute certainty, that whatever came next, she would face it with courage and with love, with Zachary by her side and their family surrounding them. She had learned that night in the snow that she was stronger than she knew, braver than she thought, and capable of surviving anything. And she had learned in all the years since that love, real love, the kind that sees you at your worst and chooses you anyway, was worth fighting for with everything you had. As she and Zachary climbed into bed that night, she curled into his arms the way she had done thousands of times before, and she smiled in the darkness, grateful beyond words for the life they shared. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new joys, and she would meet them the way she met every day, with hope and determination and the absolute knowledge that whatever came, they would face it together. And that, she thought as sleep claimed her, was the best happy ending anyone could ask for. Not a life without struggles or difficulties, but a life filled with love and purpose, and the kind of deep contentment that came from knowing you were exactly where you were meant to be, with exactly who you were meant to be with. She had found her home, not in a place but in a person, and that home would shelter her for all the days of her life.